Hello guys and welcome back to our channel. Now in this video, a Pamkala man shares the obsession of Pamkala people with dogs. Now he says the obsession with dogs in Pamkala societies isn't just about companionship, but it's rooted in power, domination and control. From European aristocrats holding horns as status symbols to the brutal use of attack dogs to enforce slavery and colonization, like dogs have been weaponized to uphold social hierarchies. Now he talks about this obsession that masquerades as love but is actually rooted in dominance and control. We're talking about the Pamkala fixation on dogs, from the aristocrats who hoarded horns as status symbols to the settlers who used attack dogs to enforce slavery and colonization. Now, the relationship between Pamkala people and dogs is far more complex and sinister than we've been led to believe. But that's not all. Pamkala people have also perfected the art of exploiting others while avoiding real work themselves. From plantations to factories, the ruling classes have reaped the rewards of stolen labor while posturing as architects of civilization. It's time to shatter the myths and confront the uncomfortable truth. So join me as he explains why Pamkala people have always had way too many dogs and how Pamkala people have always been lazy. With that said, let's take a look at his videos. I will be right back.
White people have always had way too many dogs because they have always needed something to control besides other people. White people's obsession with dogs isn't about companionship, it's about domination. From European aristocrats hoarding hounds like status symbols to settlers using attack dogs to enforce slavery and colonization, white societies have long treated dogs better than people, as long as they were obedient. They bred dogs to enforce social hierarchies, hunting hounds for nobles, attack dogs for slaves. They prioritized dog breeding over feeding the poor, even when their own economies were in collapse. They weaponized dogs against enslaved people, indigenous communities, and their political enemies. Because why do your own dirty work? They humanized dogs while treating actual humans, especially black and brown people, like animals. White people today pretend like their dog obsession is about love, but historically, it was about hierarchy, power, and violence. White elites have always used dogs to reinforce class hierarchies. In medieval Europe, dogs weren't companions, they were status symbols. In feudal Europe, hunting dogs were luxury items. Commoners were banned from owning them. Greyhounds, bloodhounds, and mastiffs were legally restricted to nobility. Owning a well-bred hunting dog was as important as owning land. It showed that you were better than the peasants. White elites treated dogs like extensions of their own power. Poachers, aka starving peasants, if caught with a noble's dog breed. Dogs were bred to enforce class control. Bloodhounds didn't just hunt deer, they hunted people. Even in times of famine and war, aristocrats spent fortunes on their dog kennels because their dogs meant more to them than their subjects. And yes, the white obsession with purebred dogs comes directly from their obsession with racial and class purity. White settlers didn't just own dogs, they used them as colonial weapons. Wherever white people went, so did their attack dogs. Spanish colonizers used war dogs to native people. Columbus and Cortez didn't just bring swords, they brought mastiffs trained to rip native people apart. Dogger was a colonial strategy, letting their war dogs feast on native peoples in public. They justified it by calling native people subhumans, but gave their dogs full military honors. Dogs were used to enforce slavery. Enslavers bred hunting dogs specifically to chase, maim, and unalive escaped slaves. Bloodhounds and mastiffs were trained to track black bodies across plantations. Runaways feared the dogs as much as the slave catchers, because once they were set loose, it was over. Settlers also used the dogs to control Native Americans. During westward expansion, U.S. soldiers used attack dogs against Native resistance fighters. These same Indian hunting dogs were later rebranded for police forces. While Native people were driven onto reservations, white people built entire industries around sport hunting with dogs. White people have never just been dog lovers. They have always used dogs to reinforce racial and class order. White people have always prioritized dogs over human lives. If there's one thing that white elites hate, it's helping the poor. But if there's one thing they'll always fund, it's breeding dogs. During the Irish potato famine between 1845 and 1852, British landlords let millions starve, while continuing to fund elite dog kennels. During the Great Depression, rich white Americans kept their purebred dogs in luxury, while their neighbors starved. During apartheid, white South Africans refused even basic education for black children, but spent fortunes on breeding and importing European hunting dogs. If given the choice between saving a dog and saving a starving human being, white elites have historically chose the dog. And this mindset is still alive today. White people will donate millions to animal shelters, but ignore poverty in black and brown communities. They'll cry over a police dog, but justify carved black people. They'll campaign for dog adoption harder than they'll ever campaign for racial justice. White people have always seen some humans as less valuable than animals. White people invented dog while pretending to be against it. White people obsess over purebred dogs because they invented blood purity in the first place. Eugenics, the science of breeding superior humans, was modeled after dog breeding. Mustache Man Who Shall Not Be Named was obsessed with German shepherds and promoted breeding programs for both dogs and people. White aristocrats wrote entire books about how mixing dog breeds was as dangerous as mixing races. Even today, white people assign race to dogs. Pit bulls, aka black dogs, are criminalized, while golden retrievers, aka white dogs, get a pass. Black dogs get adopted less from shelters because white people unconsciously associate them with danger. Police forces breed and train attack dogs the same exact way they did in slavery and colonial wars. White people invented and applied it to their own pets. White people's dog obsession is an escape from their own social decline. They refuse to have kids, but will raise 3 Labradors like their biological offspring. They feel disconnected from community, so they turn dogs into their emotional crutches. They want unconditional obedience, so they choose dogs over humans. White people's dog obsession is about control, not love. That's why they ignore human suffering while spending millions on pet pampering. That's why they cry when a police dog gets hurt, but justify police aggression against people. That's why they advocate for animal rights while voting for politicians who gut social programs for children. White people treat dogs better than humans because they don't challenge whiteness. Dogs don't talk back. They don't demand reparations. They don't compete with white men for jobs, and they don't expose white privilege. Until now. White people don't love dogs. They love what they represent: obedience, control, and unconditional acceptance. White people's dog obsession isn't about love. It's a historical reflection of how they see the world. Some humans deserve loyalty and care. Others deserve to be hunted and controlled. And the best companions? The ones who never question their master. White people don't own dogs. They need them. Because without them, they'd have to face the fact that their entire civilization is built on dehumanizing everyone else. White people are the laziest exploiters in history, and the receipts are endless. White people love to posture as the architects of civilization, the hardest working people to ever grace the earth. But the historical record says otherwise. They have never built anything without forcing other people to do the labor. From the plantations of the Americas to the factories of the Industrial Revolution, from colonial conquests to modern corporate exploitation, the white ruling classes have perfected the art of avoiding real work while reaping the rewards of stolen labor. They enslaved millions rather than farming their own land. They looted entire continents rather than develop their own resources. They forced children into dangerous factories while sitting in boardrooms. They built entire economic systems around wage theft and inherited wealth. And today they still live off the spoils of past and present exploitation while calling everyone else lazy. The backbone of white economic dominance wasn't ingenuity or effort. It was forced labor on a global scale. The transatlantic slave trade was born because white landowners refused to till their own soil. European empires enslaved millions rather than build self-sufficient societies. Plantation owners in the US and Caribbean sat in mansions while enslaved Africans worked from dawn to dusk. After abolition, they created sharecropping, tenant farming, and debt peonage to keep non-white people working for free. Translation: white people never built their own economies. They just stole bodies to do it for them. If they were really the world's hardest workers, why did they need millions of enslaved people to do all the labor? It wasn't just labor they avoided. They refused to even create the conditions for labor. They stole land from indigenous peoples rather than develop their own agricultural systems. They plundered Africa, India, and Southeast Asia for raw materials instead of just producing their own. They extracted wealth from colonies while leaving the native people in poverty. They still live off stolen land and resources to this day, while pretending like their wealth comes from hard work. White civilization isn't built on innovation or industriousness. It's built on wholesale theft, followed by smug self-congratulation. When forced labor became less convenient, white elites turned to a whole new class of unpaid workers, their own children. Factories in 19th century England forced children as young as 5 into 16-hour shifts. Coal mines sent white children through tunnels while their fathers drank in pubs. U.S. textile mills worked children to the bone because paying adults was too expensive. White elites lounged in drawing rooms while their own children hacked up soot in mills. If they were such hard workers, why did they need to enslave children to keep their industries running? Slavery and child labor wasn't enough. White business owners then created an entire economic system to keep avoiding work. They paid starvation wages while raking in profits. They passed anti-union laws so workers could not demand fair pay. They relied on immigrant labor, such as Chinese, Mexican, and Caribbean, instead of working hard themselves. They offshored modern labor to the global south, while sitting in air-conditioned offices. And the scam continues. They call themselves job creators while hoarding wealth. They whine about immigrants taking jobs they refuse to do. They pretend finance is hard work, while laborers break their back to survive. White economies aren't built on sweat and toil. They're built on avoiding actual work while leeching off of the working class. After centuries of exploitation, white elites don't even bother to pretend working anymore. They inherited land and businesses built on slave labor. They used nepotism to secure wealth while demanding others pull themselves up by their bootstraps. They take credit for building businesses that their grandfathers stole. They retire early while calling minimum wage workers lazy. They work from home while demanding service workers commute for $12 an hour. They vacation in stolen wealth while mocking the poor for wanting basic housing. They flip houses instead of contributing to their communities. They act like trading stocks is a job while calling actual labor unskilled. If white people built their own wealth, why does so much of it come from inheritance, exploitation, and stolen land? The truth is in the history books, but white people would rather avoid reading those too.
Now, the points raised in this video are undeniably thought-provoking and challenge the conventional narrative around the relationships between palm color people and dogs. I think some of us are hearing this for the first time, but there is a significant historical context that deserves attention. The use of dogs in reinforcing power structures, particularly in the context of colonialism, slavery, and aristocratic societies. Dogs were not simply pets. They were tools of control, symbols of status, and enforcers of social hierarchies. Now, the idea that palm color elites historically prioritized dog breeding over feeding the poor, or even over addressing the economic collapse of their own societies, speaks volumes about the misplaced values of these ruling classes. It is chilling but true that dogs were often more valued than human lives, especially when those lives belonged to enslaved people or indigenous populations. Now, the assertion that dogs were bred to serve specific purposes, whether as hunting hounds for the aristocracy or attack dogs to subjugate the oppressed, raises a powerful question. What does it say about a society when the creatures they cherish are given more care and attention than the people they exploit? Equally compelling is the argument that this obsession with dogs goes beyond the mere concept of companionship and taps into a deep psychological need for domination and hierarchy. It's as if the bond with these animals is a way to distract from the uncomfortable truth of how power structures were, and in many ways still are, built on dehumanization. Dogs who remain loyal and obedient are a constant reminder of control, a comfort to those who have built empires on the backs of the oppressed. Now, his commentary on palm color people being the laziest exploiters in history cuts to the heart of systemic inequality. The fact that palm color elites relied on enslaved labor to fuel their plantations, looted resources from entire continents, and then claimed the fruits of that labor as their own, shows a history of extraction rather than creation. Now, this history exposes the myth that Pamkala societies have always been the driving force of civilization, as their progress and wealth were built on the exploitation of others and not their own labor. This perspective forces us to re-examine not only the history of race power and exploitation, but also the lasting implications of these dynamics today. It sheds light on how the obsession with dogs may be more than just a quirky cultural phenomenon. Now, it's a reflection of deeper societal issues that persist in the way power, race, and control are still intertwined in our modern world. Now, throughout history, dogs have played essential roles in the lives of monarchs, aristocrats, and noble families. These loyal companions were cherished for their affectionate nature and as symbols of wealth, power, and status. Now, certain breeds, especially favored by royal courts and noble households, were bred for their elegance, grace, and loyalty, and some served practical purposes like hunting or guarding, while others were kept purely for companionship. Now, their presence in these elite circles highlights the deep bond between dogs and the aristocracy throughout centuries. Now, in 1824, an anonymous Scotsman traveled through Jamaica to survey the island's sugar plantations and social conditions. Notably, his journal describes an encounter with the formidable dog and its astonishing interaction with the enslaved. The traveler's host, a Mr. McJames, made him a present of a fine bloodhound, descended from a breed used for hunting maroons during Jamaica's Second Maroon War, almost 3 decades earlier. Now, the Maroons had surrendered to the British partly out of terror of these dogs, a Cuban breed that officials were promoting for use in Jamaica on account of their effectiveness is quelling black resistance. Unfamiliar with the breed, the traveler observed its astounding aversion to the slaves. For instance, when a young slave entered his room to wake him early one morning, the animal viciously charged the boy. Now, the Scotsman judged that without his intervention, the hound would positively have torn him to pieces. Returning later to his room, he found an intruder, a large black man with a drawn cutlass in his hand, pinned into a corner by the dog which was biting deeply into his leg. The man escaped, but the Scotsman followed the trail of blood into a thick jungle in the center of the forest. Presuming the man to be maroon with no good intention, the traveler appreciated the dog's tenacious enforcement of racial boundaries and its seemingly natural inclination to attack black bodies. Now, the lash and shackles remain the major symbols of physical degradation fixed in historical memory on slavery. Yet, as recounted by witnesses, including slaves themselves, the dog was perhaps a more effective tool for managing labor or even inflicting horrific pain or unaliving on those who defied their master's commands. Now, central to this Atlantic tragedy were black victims who insisted upon their own humanity by innovatively resisting canine attacks that animalized them as prey. Now, attacked dogs thus formed a touchstone for black cultures. Despite learning from mostly local experiences with slave hounds, black resistors widely exhibited uncanny similarities in evading the dogs by using scents to misdirect them, wading in water, hiding from them, and as a last resort, fighting them. Now, the hounds pursued them, extending Pamkala power into mountains, swamps, and forests with their acute extra-human abilities to scent, hear, outrun, signal attack, and sometimes unalive black bodies. The ingenuity and perseverance of slaves in fleeing dogs to terrain beyond the plantocracy's domain later enlivened the abolitionist cause by manifesting the peculiar depravity of slavery. Now, dogs embodied a crude form of biopower for slave societies across the Americas. They optimized the extraction of labor from black bodies by using threats that encouraged compliance and coercion that enforced biological controls. Dogs secured both the foundations of capitalism and the Pamkala bodies that might enjoy it. Slave dogs subdued human property, enforced legal categories of subjugation, and built efficient economic regimes. The common refrain among slaves of being treated worse than a dog was no hyperbole, as many blacks were made subservient by a lesser species that was well maintained by the Pamkala power it fortified. Now, training dogs to attack only blacks instantiated articism, as planters interpreted this as confirmation that even dogs knew the supposed immutable inferiority of blackness. Now, as a form of biopower in the slave societies of the Americas, hounds used violence to naturalize blackness and Pamkaladness for the sake of the planters' profits, defined an existential struggle for black humanity, and proved the evils of slavery for abolitionists. Now, when it comes to what this palm color man is saying about palm color people being lazy exploiters. This is a harsh reality that's very difficult to ignore. Throughout history, we have seen a pattern of palm color individuals and societies claiming credit for building civilizations, economies, and innovations, when in fact they've consistently relied on the labor, expertise, and resources of Black and indigenous people. From the transatlantic slave trade to colonialism, apartheid, and modern-day systemic racism, palm color people have profited from the exploitation of Black bodies, minds, and labor. They've used our ancestors as forced labor to build their empires, extracted our resources to fuel their economies, and erased our contributions to their histories. And yet, despite this glaring truth, palm color people continue to perpetuate the myth of their own superiority and industriousness. They claim to be the architects of civilization, the innovators and the hard workers, while ignoring the fact that their successes are built on the backs of Black and indigenous people. But we know the truth, and it's time to shatter this myth and confront the reality of palm color exploitation. We have finally come to the end of the video, but what do our viewers have to say? Share your thoughts, your views, your contributions as well in the comment section. Thank you for always watching, and see you in our next video as we bring you another interesting video.